Have you ever noticed how some families don't just hurt you in private, they perform your humiliation in public? Like it's entertainment. That Thanksgiving, my father had 14 guests at his table, the good plates, the matching napkins, the perfect lighting, and one goal: to impress the most powerful man in our town, the man he needed for a land deal that could change his life. I was in the kitchen since sunrise, hands smelling like onions and rosemary, feet aching on cold tile, my child sitting quietly at the corner of the room, watching. And when everyone finally sat down, my father stood, lifted his glass, and smiled like a man about to tell a harmless joke. He introduced my sister with pride, he praised her title, he made sure everyone clapped. Then he looked at me. And in front of all those people, he didn't call me his daughter, he called me the help. Some people laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was easier than stopping him. And then my child leaned toward me, fingers gripping my sleeve, and whispered the question that still burns in my chest. Mom, is being the help bad? I felt every muscle in my body go still, because that's when I realized this wasn't about me anymore. This was my father teaching my child to feel ashamed of me. But here's what my father didn't know. He'd invited one guest to that table who already knew exactly who I was, not as the help, not as the maid, but as the person who controlled the contract he was desperate to win. And once that guest recognized me, the dinner didn't just get uncomfortable, it got dangerous, because the truth wasn't just embarrassing, it was legal, and if I said one sentence the wrong way, my father could lose the deal, lose his reputation, and expose something he'd been hiding under my name for years. So I stayed quiet, until my father slid a folder across the table, and whispered the words he thought would trap me forever. Sign this, in front of everyone. That's when I understood. The real betrayal wasn't the insult, it was the paperwork, and what happened next, in that warm dining room with candles still burning, made sure my father never hosted another holiday again. Not because I screamed, not because I attacked him, but because I finally did the one thing he couldn't survive. I told the truth, with proof. Thanksgiving in my parents' house never smelled like comfort, it smelled like strategy, rosemary, butter, polished wood, expensive candles that were only lit when someone important was coming. Even the air felt arranged, like it had been instructed not to misbehave. I stood at the kitchen sink at 6 in the morning, rinsing sweet potatoes under cold water while the house was still dark. The overhead light buzzed faintly. Outside the window, frost clung to the edges of the lawn like a warning. I had already been awake for 2 hours. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, because I didn't trust what the day might do. My son, Noah, was asleep in the small, in-law suite behind the main house, the space my parents liked to call temporary. He had been 3 when we moved in, he was 8 now. Temporary had stretched like elastic until it nearly snapped. I wasn't living there because I couldn't afford to leave. That's what people assume. The truth is more complicated. And complications don't fit neatly into family jokes. I dried my hands and checked my phone. 3 emails from my operations manager, 1 message from a property owner in Charleston, 2 missed calls from a vendor about an emergency HV repair. My company ran vacation estates along the coast, maintenance, staff coordination, guest turnover, security compliance. It wasn't cleaning. It wasn't helping. It was logistics, contracts, liability coverage, payroll. It was a business, and it had grown enough that this year, if everything finalized correctly, I would no longer need anyone's backyard to survive. That's what my father didn't know. Or maybe he knew. Maybe that's why today felt tense before it even started. The back door creaked open behind me. "You're early," my mother said. She always said that. No matter what time I arrived, I turned. "It's Thanksgiving." She glanced at the clock like she was measuring my usefulness. "The turkey needs brining," she added, "and don't forget the rolls this time." "I didn't forget last time," I said evenly. She gave a tight smile. "Well, just don't. That was my role in this house. Prevention, containment. Never reaction." I moved around the kitchen automatically, knife, cutting board, oven check, fridge inventory. My body knew the choreography of this house even when my heart had stopped participating years ago. At 7:15 a.m., my father's office door clicked open down the hallway. I felt the shift before I heard his voice. Natalie. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. I stepped into the hallway. Yes. He was already dressed, pressed slacks, blue sweater, watch polished. He looked like a man preparing for a meeting, not a holiday. Caleb Reddick confirmed, he said. Hey, and his wife will arrive at 1. Caleb Reddick. The name settled into my chest. Of course he had. Of course this wasn't just dinner. Caleb Reddick owned half the undeveloped land between our town and the highway. Developers called him careful. Investors called him precise. And for the past 6 months, my father had been circling him like a satellite. Because my father wanted to sell the back acreage. The same acreage my son rode his bike on. The same land my in-law suit sat on. My father didn't look at me when he continued. Be presentable, he said. And don't overstep. I nodded once. Of course. He paused then. Finally looking at me, his gaze scanned me the way you evaluate furniture placement. You understand, he added quietly. This deal is important. So is family, I said. His mouth twitched, almost amused. Family is exactly why this deal matters. He walked past me. That was my father's gift, redefining words until they fit his needs. Family meant leverage, support meant compliance, temporary meant control. I went back to the kitchen. At 8, Noah padded in wearing his green sweater, hair sticking up in soft angles. Mom, he said, rubbing his eyes. Is it big people Thanksgiving again? I crouched down and pulled him close. He smelled like sleep and laundry soap. Yes, I said. But we'll stick together. He nodded seriously. He'd learned to read rooms before he learned long division. Is Grandpa going to make jokes? He asked quietly. My throat tightened. I don't know, I said. But if he does, you look at me, okay? He nodded again. Children shouldn't need instructions like that. But this house required preparation. By 11, the dining room looked staged. Crystal glasses aligned perfectly, napkins folded like swans, candles placed at even intervals. It was beautiful. And completely false. At 12:30, cars began pulling into the driveway. Neighbors, church friends, my aunt and uncle. Then at exactly 1 o'clock, a dark SUV rolled in. My father moved toward the front door before it had fully stopped. I stayed in the kitchen doorway, hands drying on a towel. Caleb Reddick stepped inside. He wasn't loud, he didn't smile too widely, but people shifted around him automatically. His wife Andrea followed, sharp eyes, controlled posture. Observing my father's voice carried through the foyer. Caleb! So glad you made it. Handshakes. Shoulder pats. Then Caleb's gaze moved past him. And landed on me. Recognition flickered, but not full recognition. More like he was searching memory. My father followed the direction of his eyes. He said lightly, That's Natalie, she helps around here. The words slid into the room like oil. Helps around here. Not daughter. Just function. A few people chuckled politely. Andrea's eyebrows lifted slightly. Caleb nodded slowly. Nice to meet you, he said. His tone was neutral. But his eyes lingered half a second too long. I felt something tighten in my chest, because I knew something my father didn't. Caleb Reddick knew my company. He didn't know my last name in connection to this house. He didn't know I lived behind it. But he absolutely knew the name Harborline Estate Management, because Harborline managed 3 of his coastal properties. And I was Harborline. But I didn't say that. Not yet. The afternoon blurred into serving trays and forced laughter. I refilled glasses, carried plates. Adjusted seating. Noah sat beside me quiet, watching everything. At 2:15 everyone settled. My father stood at the head of the table. Fork tapped against crystal. Silence fell obediently. I want to give thanks. He began warmly. For prosperity, for blessings, for the people who make this community strong. He turned toward my younger cousin first. Then toward my sister, successful, polished, visiting from the city. And of course, he said proudly, for my daughter Rachel, corporate attorney, making us proud every day. Applause, smiles. Then he turned to me. Pause, small grin. And Natalie, he said lightly. Well, every family needs help. Laughter. Not loud but enough. Enough for the meaning to land. I felt Noah stiffen beside me. I kept my face calm. Years of practice. My father lifted his glass again. One daughter builds contracts, he added, voice amused. The other helps clean up after them. More laughter. My ears rang. I heard someone cough. I heard silverware clink. I heard my own heartbeat in my throat. And then Noah's small fingers tugged at my sleeve. I looked down. His eyes were wide and confused. "Mom?" he whispered. The room felt very far away. "Yes," he swallowed. Us being the help bad. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They just sat there in the center of the table like something fragile and explosive at the same time. No one laughed now. My mother's smile froze. My sister stared at her plate. My father cleared his throat. "It's a joke," he said quickly. "Don't be sensitive." But Noah wasn't looking at him. He was looking at me. Waiting, and I realized something in that moment. This wasn't about humiliation anymore. This was about inheritance. What was my son inheriting from this table? Shame, silence, or truth? I felt the weight of every year I'd stayed quiet. The rent paid in cash. The waiver my father had asked me to sign last month. The way he'd told Caleb the back unit was empty. Empty. Like we didn't exist. I set my fork down slowly. I didn't stand yet. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at my son. "Being the help isn't bad," I said calmly. "But pretending someone is small when they're not, that's not a joke." The air shifted. My father's jaw tightened. "Natalie," he warned softly. But something had already changed. Because across the table, Caleb Reddick had gone very still, and he was looking at me, not with confusion anymore. He leaned forward slightly. "Natalie," he said evenly, "do you own Harborline Estate Management?" The room didn't gasp, it froze. "What?" he said sharply. Caleb didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on me. "Harborline," he repeated. "You're the one I speak to every Tuesday at 9. Every head turned. I felt the ground steady under my feet. And for the first time that day, I wasn't the one off balance. I met Caleb's gaze. "Yes," I said quietly, and in that single word, the performance ended. The silence after I said, "yes," felt heavier than the silverware on the table. 14 people, 14 pairs of eyes. My father was still standing at the head of the table, glass in hand, like a man who had just misread the room in the worst possible way. Caleb Reddick didn't smile. He just looked recalculating. "Your Harborline," he repeated calmly. "Yes," I said. "I am." My voice surprised even me. It wasn't sharp, it wasn't defensive, it was steady. And that steadiness did more damage than any raised tone could have. My father gave a short laugh, then forced. "Well," he said, trying to recover, "she does a little property work on the side. Nothing major." Caleb's head tilted slightly. "Nothing major," he echoed. Andrea, his wife, glanced at her husband with a look that said she was watching carefully now. Caleb folded his napkin neatly beside his plate. "For clarity," he said, voice controlled, "Harborline manages 3 of my coastal properties, full-service operations, staffing inspections, guest liability compliance." He paused. "Annual contract value just under 7 figures." The word value hung in the air. My father's smile didn't return. It evaporated. "That can't be right," he said quickly. "She lives here." The words were meant to shrink me. Instead, they exposed him. Caleb looked around the table slowly. "I wasn't aware where she lived," he said evenly. "I was aware of the quality of her work." My father's fingers tightened around his glass. "You didn't mention your connection," Caleb added, turning back to me. "I didn't think it was relevant," I replied. It was true. I had never once used my father's name in business. Never once leveraged it. The company had grown because I built it quietly, relentlessly, strategically. The dining room felt smaller now, hotter. My aunt shifted in her seat. My sister finally looked at me, really looked. My father set his glass down with deliberate control. "Let's not turn Thanksgiving into a board meeting," he said sharply. Caleb didn't react to the tone. Instead, he asked a question that landed far harder. "You said the back unit was vacant." My heartbeat slowed. There it was. The real fault line. My father's eyes flicked toward me. "It will be," he said. "Will be." Andrea's gaze sharpened. "Vacant," she repeated. "A's in unoccupied?" "Yes," my father said firmly. "It's just temporary family accommodation." Temporary. The word again. Caleb's expression didn't change. How long has it been occupied? He asked calmly. My father hesitated. Too long. Not relevant, he snapped. Caleb leaned back in his chair. It's very relevant, he said. My offer is based on vacant possession. The table had stopped pretending to eat. Noah was gripping my hand under the table so tightly my fingers tingled. I bent slightly toward him. It's okay, I whispered. But my pulse had shifted. Because this was no longer a social embarrassment. This was legal. My father cleared his throat. We'll handle it, he said quickly. She understands. His gaze locked onto mine. A silent order. Sign, comply, protect the deal. Because 3 weeks earlier, he had called me into his office and placed a document on his desk. A waiver. Not a lease termination. Not a standard notice. A waiver of tenancy rights. It stated that I acknowledged I was a guest without legal claim, and that I agreed to vacate within 60 days without dispute or compensation. Buried on page 2 was something more dangerous. A clause stating the unit had been rent-free. Rent-free, a lie. I paid him every month in cash because he insisted on it. No paper trail, he had said years ago. It keeps things simple. Simple for him. If I signed that waiver, I would be declaring that I had never paid rent. Which meant I would have no standing, no protection. And if the deal closed based on false vacancy declarations, it wouldn't be me who carried the legal exposure, it would be him. My father met my eyes across the table now. You'll sign tonight, he said quietly. It wasn't a suggestion. Caleb noticed the exchange. Is there something I should be aware of? He asked evenly. My father laughed too quickly. No. Just family logistics. Family logistics. The phrase made something cold settle into my chest, because family logistics had meant something very specific for years. You stay quiet. You don't embarrass me. You don't interfere. My mother finally spoke. We're so grateful she's had somewhere to stay, she said gently, like she was smoothing a wrinkle. Grateful. I felt Noah shift again. I could feel his confusion rising like heat. Grateful for what? For paying rent in cash. For mowing the lawn. For cooking every holiday meal. I turned slightly toward him. He was staring at my father, trying to reconcile the joke with the tension. Caleb set his hands on the table. Let me ask directly, he said. Are you currently occupying the unit? I answered. I didn't look at my father. I didn't apologize. The truth didn't require apology. Caleb nodded slowly. And have you been paying rent? The room felt electric. My father's voice cut in immediately. She's family. That wasn't an answer. Caleb didn't blink. That wasn't my question. The air seemed to thin. I looked at Caleb. Yes, I said calmly. I've paid rent monthly. My mother inhaled sharply. My father's face changed. Color drained, then returned in a flush of anger. That's not how we frame it, he snapped. Frame it. Like the truth was a picture to be adjusted. Caleb's tone hardened just slightly. Do you have records? Was. Because I did. I kept photographs of the cash envelopes before handing them over. I kept bank withdrawal timestamps. I kept the text messages where my father confirmed amounts. I learned early that in this house, survival required documentation. My father pushed back from the table abruptly. This is absurd, he said. You're doing this deliberately. I stayed seated. No, I said quietly. I'm not. But what I didn't say out loud was this. You tried to erase me from your paperwork. You tried to sell the land I live on while telling the buyer it was empty. You tried to get me to sign away my rights in front of witnesses. You miscalculated. Caleb rose slowly from his chair. The movement alone commanded attention. I don't conduct transactions based on incomplete disclosures, he said calmly. If the unit is tenant occupied, that affects valuation and closing terms. My father's jaw tightened. She'll be out by January, he insisted. Will you? Caleb asked me directly. Every eye turned again. I could feel Noah watching me like the answer determined our future. I will move, I said carefully, but not under a false declaration. My father's voice sharpened. You don't have leverage. I met his gaze evenly. I have documentation. The word landed. Documentation. In business, that word matters more than volume. Caleb's assistant, who had been quiet until now, opened her folder slightly. Mr. Reddick, she said softly, vacant possession is a material representation. My father turned toward her with visible irritation. This is a family issue. Andrea's voice cut through. Calm but firm. No, she said. It's a disclosure issue. Silence followed, heavy, thick. My aunt cleared her throat awkwardly. My sister stared at her wine glass like she wished she could disappear into it. And Noah whispered softly beside me, "Mom, are we in trouble?" I squeezed his hand gently. "No," I said, "we're not." But inside something was shifting. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to avoid escalation. I was letting the truth stand. My father looked at me with something close to disbelief. He demanded. I held his gaze. "You risked it," I replied quietly. That was the moment the performance fully cracked. Because humiliation I could absorb, but fraud, that had edges. Caleb straightened his jacket. "I'm going to pause further discussion until my attorney reviews the occupancy status," he said calmly. Pause. In business language, pause rarely means resume. My father took a step toward him. "Caleb, this is unnecessary." Caleb didn't move. "What's unnecessary?" he said. "Is discovering material facts at the dinner table." The doorbell rang in the distance. No one moved to answer it. The room felt suspended between versions of reality, and I realized something clearly. My father hadn't just underestimated me. He had assumed I would protect him. That I would choose silence over stability. That I would let my son learn that humiliation is part of belonging. He was wrong. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket. I didn't look at it. But I knew what it was. A reminder from my attorney. We had scheduled a call for Monday to review the waiver he wanted me to sign. The waiver that declared the unit rent-free. The waiver that would make me invisible on paper. My father looked at me one more time. "Sign it," he said under his breath. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly enough that only I could hear. I met his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. "I won't," I said. The word felt clean. Caleb watched us carefully. Andrea folded her napkin. The room shifted again. Because once a no is spoken clearly, it cannot be unheard, and my father had just realized something he never prepared for. I was no longer afraid of what happened after the table cleared. The dinner wasn't over. But the illusion was, and what came next would not be about embarrassment. It would be about consequences. Dinner ended without applause, no dramatic shouting, no plates thrown, just the slow, careful unraveling of a performance that had gone wrong. Guests began to leave in polite waves. My aunt hugged my mother a little too tightly. My cousin avoided eye contact with me entirely. My sister muttered something about an early morning flight. Caleb and Andrea were the last to stand. Caleb shook my father's hand, firm, professional, restrained. "We'll have counsel reach out," he said evenly. Not "we'll move forward," not "we'll talk soon." Counsel. That word alone shifted the weight of the room. My father's smile was rigid. "Of course," he said. "We'll clarify everything." Clarify. As if this had been confusion instead of concealment. Caleb turned to me. "We'll speak Tuesday," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. I nodded once. Andrea met my eyes for a moment longer than necessary. There was no pity there. Just recognition. Then they left. The front door closed. The house fell into a silence that felt completely different from before. Not polite silence. Consequential silence. My father stood still at the head of the table, staring at the door as if willing it to reopen. My mother began stacking plates too quickly, porcelain clinking harder than necessary. Noah slipped his hand into mine again. "Are we okay?" he whispered. "Yes," I said softly. But my pulse hadn't fully settled. Because I knew what came next. My father didn't confront publicly. He cornered privately. "Natalie," he said sharply. Not loud, not explosive, controlled. I looked at Noah. "Go to the suite," I told him gently. "Start your book. I'll be right there." He hesitated, then nodded and left quietly. When the hallway cleared, I followed my father down the corridor toward his office. The room smelled like leather and old paper. The desk was immaculate, the blinds half drawn, the lamp casting warm, deceptive light. He shut the door behind me. The click echoed louder than it should have. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he turned. "You embarrassed me," he said flatly. I didn't react. "You introduced me as help," I replied calmly. He waved that away like it was insignificant. No, I said. It wasn't. His jaw tightened. You don't understand what you just jeopardized. I understand perfectly, I answered. He walked behind his desk and opened the top drawer, the locked one. I knew it well. 3 weeks earlier, he had taken out the same folder from that drawer and slid it toward me. He did it again now. Placed the document carefully in front of me. He said, I didn't touch the paper. I told you, I said quietly. I won't. His eyes hardened. You're a tenant at will, he said. I've no lease. I pay rent? Cash, he snapped. Which means nothing. I held his gaze. It means everything, I said. Because I documented it. For the first time that evening, something flickered across his face that wasn't anger. You kept records? He asked slowly. Yes. A muscle moved in his cheek. You think you're clever, he said. No, I replied. I think I'm careful. He leaned forward slightly. You live here because I allowed it. I live here because I pay to, I corrected. He laughed once, humorless. You really want to do this? My voice stayed even. I didn't start this. He straightened. You think Caleb cares about you, he asked suddenly. You're useful, that's all. I didn't flinch. I'm fine being useful, I said. I'm not fine being erased. The room felt smaller now. He pushed the document toward me again. Read clause 4. He said. I did. Occupant acknowledges no rental agreement exists and no consideration has been exchanged. No consideration. No payment. No rights. If I signed it, I would legally declare that I had lived rent-free for 5 years. Which meant any claim of tenancy protection would evaporate. Which meant he could sell immediately. Which meant I would have no leverage at all. You misrepresented vacancy, I said quietly. He didn't deny it. I intended to resolve it before closing, he replied. By forcing me to sign this in front of witnesses, I asked. His silence answered. You would have done it, he said suddenly. No, I replied. You've always been compliant. The word hit harder than the insult earlier. Compliant. That's how he saw me. Not loyal, not patient. Compliant. He miscalculated. I was surviving, I said softly. He stepped around the desk, coming closer. You think documentation makes you powerful? No, I said. Documentation makes me safe. His voice dropped. If this deal collapses, I lose more than pride. There it was. Not apology, not acknowledgement, loss. Financial exposure. He had likely already committed capital based on expected proceeds. Maybe leveraged credit. Maybe promised something. You didn't tell him it was occupied, I said. I told him it would be vacant, he snapped. That's not the same. It's negotiable. No, I said calmly. It's material. He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. He underestimated something fundamental. I had spent 5 years negotiating contracts larger than this land sale. I understood material representation. He had assumed I didn't. You're not walking away from this unscathed, he warned. I didn't react. I'm not trying to win, I said. I'm trying to not be trapped. His hand slammed lightly against the desk, not enough to look unhinged, but enough to release pressure. You owe me, he said. For what? I asked. I inhaled slowly. I paid you every month. That wasn't rent. What was it? I asked. He hesitated. He said finally. I almost laughed. You required it in cash. I reminded him. You set the amount. That was convenience. For you, I replied. He walked back behind the desk. You'll sign, he said, a quieter now. No. The word felt heavier this time. Because it wasn't emotional, it was final. His eyes darkened. You want to play legal? He asked. I already am, I said. His expression shifted. I met his gaze without blinking. It means my attorney has reviewed this document. He froze. You involved a lawyer. Yes. He stared at me as if I had broken an unspoken rule. You escalated? He said. You handed me a waiver denying payment I made, I replied. You escalated. Silence stretched between us. The ticking of the office clock felt louder than before. Finally, he spoke again. You realize, he said slowly, if you push this, people will choose sides. I'm not asking them to, I answered. They'll choose mine. Maybe, I said. He leaned back slightly. You think Caleb sides with you? I think Caleb sides with liability reduction, I said evenly. That earned the faintest flicker of respect or annoyance, hard to tell. "You've changed?" he muttered. "No," I said quietly. "You just stopped having control." The words hung between us. He didn't deny that either. From the hallway, I heard Noah's footsteps faintly. The sound steadied me. "I'm moving," I said calmly. "But not under this document." "Where?" he demanded. "That's not your concern." His eyes narrowed. "You can't afford to buy right now," he said. I didn't respond, because he was correct. My credit was still repairing from my divorce. And he knew it. "You'll rent," he continued. "You'll pay more, and you'll regret losing proximity." Proximity, he meant childcare, he meant leverage. "I'll manage," he snapped. I stepped back toward the door. "I already do," I replied. His voice followed me. "If Caleb walks, this is on you." I turned the handle. "No," I said quietly. "It's on disclosure." I opened the door. He called after me once more. "You're making an enemy." I paused in the doorway. "You made one the moment you tried to erase me," I answered. Then I stepped into the hallway, closed the door behind me. The house felt different now. Not warmer, not colder, just clearer. Noah was waiting near the suite entrance. "Are we leaving?" he asked. "Yes," I said gently. "Are we in trouble?" "No," I replied. He nodded slowly. Then he said something that settled deeper than anything my father had said all night. Grandpa looked scared. I held his small shoulders carefully. "Sometimes," I said, "people look scared when they lose control." He thought about that. Then he asked, "Are you scared?" I looked back down the hallway toward the office door, toward the locked drawer, toward the paper he thought would silence me. "Yes," I said honestly, but not of him. That night, after Noah fell asleep, my phone buzzed. An email from Caleb's assistant. Subject line, "Request for occupancy documentation." I stared at it for a long moment, then I opened my cloud folder and began attaching files, receipts, withdrawal logs, text confirmations. Every month, every amount. Because my father believed proximity meant power, he forgot something critical. Paper travels farther than reputation. And once paper moves, it does not come back quietly. By the time the house went quiet, it was almost midnight. My father had retreated to his office after our conversation, door shut, blinds drawn. My mother moved through the kitchen like a ghost, washing, drying, reorganizing plates that were already clean. My sister left without saying goodbye. The performance had ended, but the damage was just beginning. Noah was asleep in the in-law suite when I stepped inside. His book had fallen across his chest, one hand still curled around the edge of the page. I sat beside him and brushed his hair back gently. Children sense shifts before adults admit them. He had watched something collapse tonight. And I knew I couldn't afford to let him inherit the silence I grew up with. I kissed his forehead and stepped back into the small, living area. My phone buzzed. I already knew who it would be. From A. Collins, subject request for clarification, occupancy status. I stared at the subject line for several seconds. Clarification. That's how business people say we caught something. I opened it. Natalie. Per tonight's discussion, Mr. Reddick has asked that we confirm current occupancy status of the rear dwelling. Please provide documentation of tenancy, if applicable, and any evidence of rental consideration. We will pause valuation review until this matter is clarified. Regards, A. Collins. Pause valuation review. That was worse than cancellation. Pause meant uncertainty. Uncertainty kills leverage. I leaned back in the small kitchen chair and exhaled slowly. My father had built his entire negotiation on the assumption that the rear unit was vacant. Vacant meant clean sale. Clean sale meant full price. Full price meant whatever he had already committed that money toward would remain intact. And now, there was paper in motion. I opened the cloud folder I had created 3 years earlier. A folder I hoped I'd never need. Remt Rakas. Inside were time-stamped photos of cash envelopes before I handed them to my father. Bank withdrawal screenshots. Text messages confirming amounts. I remembered the day I started doing that. Year 2 in the suite. He had casually mentioned to a neighbor, "It's good to help your kids when they need it." Help. The word again. I had smiled at the time. But that night I took photos of the envelope before sliding it across his desk. Because generosity doesn't require cash secrecy. Control does. I attached the first 12 months of records. Then the next. Every month. 5 years. I hesitated for only a moment before hitting send. Not because I was unsure. Because once sent, this wouldn't stay contained. Paper spreads. Paper circulates. Paper outlives performance. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A text from my father, "Come to my office now." I didn't respond. Another message followed. "You sent something." Not a question. An accusation. I stayed seated. If I walked down that hallway again tonight, it would become emotional. And emotion was exactly what he wanted. Instead, I replied once, "Yes, documentation requested." 3 dots appeared. Stopped. Appeared again. Then disappeared. No response. For the first time in years, I had not reacted to his urgency, and I knew that unsettled him more than confrontation ever had. The next morning, frost coated the grass like fragile glass. Noah ate cereal quietly, watching me over the rim of his bowl. "Are we moving soon?" he asked. "Yes," I said gently. "Because of last night?" "Because it's time," I replied. He nodded. He didn't push further. He never did. He had grown up in rooms where pushing led to silence. After dropping him at school, I drove directly to my attorney's office. I had scheduled the meeting weeks ago after my father first presented the waiver. At the time, I wasn't sure if I would use it. Now there was no question. Mara Singh had a calm face and sharp eyes. She listened without interrupting as I explained what happened at dinner. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. "He disclosed vacancy?" she asked. "And you can prove rental consideration?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Then this is no longer a family disagreement," she said. "It's a misrepresentation issue." The word hung in the air. Misrepresentation. Clean. Legal. Unemotional. "Will this collapse his deal?" I asked quietly. "It may restructure it," she replied. "Or delay it. But if he knowingly misrepresented occupancy, that's his exposure." Exposure. I thought about my father's face at the table when Caleb mentioned counsel. That wasn't embarrassment. "He'll blame me," I said. She met my gaze. "He already does?" she answered calmly. I couldn't argue with that. We reviewed the waiver again. Clause 4, no rental consideration. "If you had signed this," Mara said, tapping the page, "you would have relinquished tenant protections and potentially opened yourself to claims of false representation." "He wanted it signed in front of witnesses," I said. "That's pressure," she replied. "Not legality." I exhaled slowly. For years, I had thought surviving in that suite meant gratitude. Now I understood it meant documentation. By afternoon, the email thread had grown. Caleb's counsel requested confirmation of rent payment timeline. I forwarded the complete record. At 3:17 p.m., my phone rang. Caleb himself. I stepped outside before answering. "Yes. Natalie," he said evenly. "I appreciate the prompt documentation." "Of course." There was a pause. "Did your father intend to disclose occupancy prior to closing?" he asked. "No." I answered honestly. Another pause. Then understood. His tone shifted slightly, less cordial, more evaluative. "This will require adjustment." I knew what that meant. Adjusted valuation, leverage, adjusted trust. "I'm not trying to interfere," I said quietly. "I'm aware," he replied. "You're protecting your position?" It wasn't praise, but it wasn't accusation either. "Tuesday meeting stands," he added. Then he ended the call. I stood there for several seconds after the line went dead. My father had always told me that business was about relationships. What he never understood. Business is about truth backed by paper. When I returned to the house that evening, the atmosphere had changed. Not explosive, not loud, but brittle. My mother avoided eye contact. My father's office door was open this time. He stood inside, arms crossed. "You cost me leverage," he said flatly. I corrected the record. I replied. "You blindsided me? You blindsided the buyer." His jaw flexed. "You could have handled this privately," I said. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was heavy. "You think this makes you powerful?" he asked. "No," I answered. He stepped closer. "You're forgetting something," he said quietly. "What?" "You still live here." I held his gaze. "For now," I said. He studied my face carefully. "You won't find another arrangement easily," he added. He meant childcare, proximity, pressure. I will, I replied, because I already had begun looking weeks ago. A small rental near Noah's school, more expensive, less convenient, but clean. And documented. You'll regret leaving, he said. Maybe, I replied. But I'll regret staying more. That was the first honest sentence I had spoken in this house in years. He didn't respond. He turned back toward his desk. Conversation dismissed. Control slipping. That night Noah crawled into my lap while we sat on the small couch. Is Grandpa mad? He asked. Yes, I said honestly. Did you do something wrong? I looked at him carefully. No, I said. I told the truth. He thought about that. Then nodded once. Truth makes people mad sometimes, he observed. Yes, I said softly, it does. He leaned his head against my chest. I'm glad you didn't laugh, he added. I swallowed. Me too. Because that was the real shift. Not the email, not the valuation pause. Not the legal exposure. The shift was this. My son had watched me choose truth over comfort, and that inheritance mattered more than land. As I carried him to bed, my phone buzzed again. Another email. Subject revised, offer structure pending legal review. I didn't open it immediately. I didn't need to. The balance had shifted, not because I attacked, but because I refused to sign away my existence. And once paper moves, it doesn't ask permission to keep going. The revised offer arrived the next morning. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee first. Packed Noah's lunch. Buttoned his jacket while he recited spelling words under his breath. Normal routines feel heavier when you know something is shifting behind the scenes. After I dropped him at school, I sat in my car in the parking lot and opened the email. Subject revised purchase terms, conditional occupancy adjustment. The attachment was short. Too short. The original offer, my father had bragged about it, was based on full vacant possession at closing. The revised version adjusted the price downward to account for tenant occupancy and legal notice timelines. Downward significantly. I leaned back in my seat. This wasn't a minor correction. This was leverage evaporating, and my father knew it. My phone rang before I even pulled out of the lot. His name filled the screen. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. You went too far, he said immediately. I kept my voice level. I responded to a request. You knew what you were doing? Yes, I said. I did. Silence. Then his voice dropped, controlled. They reduced the offer. I assumed they would. You cost me nearly $400,000. The number sat there between us. 400,000. That wasn't pride. That wasn't ego. That was exposure. I didn't set the terms, I said calmly. You did. You could have signed. There was no rent, free arrangement, I replied. You wanted me to say there was. You're splitting hairs. No, I said. I'm separating fact from convenience. His breathing sharpened slightly. You've always thought you were smarter than you are. I'd never thought that, I said. I just learned to keep records. Another silence. Then he said something softer. Do you understand what I already committed based on that sale? There it was. The crack. He had leveraged the projected funds, perhaps expanded something, perhaps refinanced, perhaps invested ahead of liquidity. What did you commit? I asked carefully. That's not your concern. Then the valuation isn't either, I replied. The call ended without goodbye. By noon, the town already felt different, not louder, just aware. Caleb's firm wasn't small. When an offer adjusts that dramatically, people ask why, and explanations circulate faster than invitations. At 2:00, called. I heard, she said without greeting. About the revision? Yes, she sounded tired. He's furious. I know. She paused. You could have handled this quietly. I let that settle. I tried, I said. He wanted me to sign a waiver denying rent. She didn't respond immediately. Then, he told me you were being dramatic. Did he mention clause 4? I asked. Another pause. No. He told Caleb the unit was vacant, I added. She exhaled slowly. He didn't tell me that either. Of course he hadn't. My father curated information the way he curated dinner guests. Selective, strategic. He's going to fight this, she warned. I'm not fighting, I replied. I'm documenting. There was something almost sad in her voice when she said, you always were the careful one. I had to be, I answered. That evening, when I returned home, a for sale sign stood at the edge of the backacreage. It hadn't been there yesterday. Bold lettering, architectural rendering of future development, optimistic slogans. It was a message, not to buyers, to me. Progress moves forward. You're replaceable. I stepped inside the suite and locked the door behind me. Noah was at the small table drawing. He looked up. I saw. Are we moving because of that? Yes, I said gently. But not the way he thinks. He studied me. Why? Because I didn't sign something I shouldn't. He nodded slowly. That's good, he said. I smiled faintly. Why do you think that? Because you tell me not to sign things unless I understand them. I felt something tighten in my chest. Children remember everything. That night, after Noah slept, I began packing small things, not dramatically, not angrily, just efficiently. Books into boxes, kitchen items wrapped carefully, important documents placed in a separate folder. I had already secured a lease near Noah's school, higher rent, clean contract. On paper, no gray areas, no temporary. As I folded the last of the kitchen towels, there was a knock on the door, not loud. Controlled, I opened it. My father stood there, no raised voice this time, no immediate accusation, just tension coiled under composure. You're packing, he observed. Yes. You don't have to rush. I looked at him carefully. Yesterday you wanted me gone in 60 days. That was before. Before what? He hesitated. Before this escalated? It escalated when you tried to erase 5 years of rent, I said calmly. His jaw tightened again. You don't see the bigger picture. I see enough of it. He stepped slightly inside, scanning the boxes. You're making this permanent. It already was, I replied. He exhaled sharply. You think Caleb respects you for this? I think he respects disclosure. He shook his head. You embarrassed me. I corrected the record. You humiliated me in my own home. I met his eyes. You humiliated me first. The words were quiet, not explosive. Just factual. For a moment. He looked older, not weaker, just tired. You don't understand how reputation works, he said. I understand exactly, I replied. It works until paper contradicts it. He looked away first. That was new. I would have handled it. He muttered. When? I asked. He didn't answer. Because the answer was after closing. After funds cleared. After leverage shifted fully in his favor. You always think I'm the villain, he said. I think you prioritize control, I replied. That's leadership. No, I said softly. That's dominance. The silence stretched between us. Finally, he straightened. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said. But I won't regret telling the truth. He stepped back toward the door. You've made things difficult, he said. I didn't make them inaccurate, I answered. He left without another word. The door clicked shut. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet. Then my phone buzzed. Another email from Caleb's office. Revised closing schedule contingent upon vacancy confirmation. Contingent. Everything now contingent. Because a single fact had been introduced at the table. Occupancy. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was simple. But simple facts dismantle inflated narratives. I turned off the kitchen light and sat in the dark for a minute. Not because I felt defeated. Because I felt clear. For years, I thought survival meant staying quiet. Tonight I understood something different. Survival means leaving with documentation and reputation. Reputation doesn't collapse from insults. It collapses when numbers stop aligning with the story, and my father's numbers were no longer aligned. The sign on the lawn could promise future development, but the paper in motion told another version, and paper always wins over pride. By Monday morning, the town had started asking quiet questions, not directly, not boldly, but in the way small towns always do, through sideways glances, delayed responses, and careful phrasing. The sign on the backacreage was still there, but now it felt less like confidence and more like negotiation theater. I was at my desk at Harbor Line by 8:15 a.m. The office was calm, sunlight through the front windows, the low hum of printers, the smell of coffee. My operations manager, Leela, glanced at me when I walked in. You okay? She asked. Yes, I said. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't complete either. She didn't push at 9 sharp. My phone rang. Caleb. I closed my office door before answering. Good morning, I said. Morning, he replied evenly. I've reviewed the documents, assumed you would. A pause. You've been paying market-adjusted rent for the unit, he said. Yes. And your father declared it vacant. Yes. Another pause. My counsel flagged something else, he continued. My pulse shifted slightly. What? He refinanced adjacent property 2 months ago. I went still. And? I asked. He referenced anticipated proceeds from the Eckridge sale. The words felt cold. He had leveraged projected liquidity, based on a deal that required vacant possession, which he did not have. That creates exposure, Caleb said carefully, not just valuation adjustment. I leaned back in my chair slowly. That's not my involvement, I said. I'm aware, he replied. But it complicates timing. Are you withdrawing? I asked. No. That surprised me. We're restructuring, he continued. But Natalie understands something. Yes. This isn't just about occupancy anymore. It's about representation. Representation. The word carried weight. I didn't intend to trigger this, I said quietly. You didn't, he replied. He did. Silence lingered between us for a moment. Then he added, you protected yourself correctly. The sentence landed deeper than I expected. Not praise. Recognition. He said again. Bring your lease documentation. Full timeline. I will. He ended the call. I sat still for several seconds afterward. This was no longer a family disagreement. It was financial misalignment with legal consequences, and my father had built his negotiation on assumption rather than fact. That afternoon, he showed up at my office. Not announced. Not scheduled. He stepped through the glass doors like he still owned the narrative. Leela glanced at me from across the room. I've got it, I told her quietly. He stood in the center of the reception area, scanning the Harborline logo on the wall. You've done well, he said flatly. It wasn't praise. Yes, I replied. He stepped into my office when I held the door open. I spoke to my lender, he said without sitting. I assumed you would. His eyes flicked toward me. You're enjoying this, he accused. No, I said calmly. I'm managing it. He ignored that. They're reviewing the refinance terms. Because you referenced projected proceeds, I replied. You don't know that. I don't need to, I said. You told me you committed funds. He exhaled sharply. You forced my hand. I refused to sign something false. He paced once near the window. You could have handled this internally. You declared vacancy externally. That stopped him. For a moment, he didn't have a clean counter. You always push when you shouldn't, he muttered. I push when I'm cornered, I replied. He studied me differently then. Not as a daughter. That clause, he said slowly, the occupancy disclosure, Caleb didn't need to dig that deeply. He didn't, I said. He just asked. And you answered? Yes. He looked toward the glass wall where my team worked quietly. They think you're strong, he said. I replied. His jaw tightened. You'll move out, he said abruptly. Yes. When? Before closing. His eyes narrowed. No, I corrected gently. I'll protect myself. Silence. You don't understand liquidity strain, he said. I understand documentation strain, I replied. He stepped closer to my desk. You think Caleb respects you for exposing this. I think he respects transparency. You embarrassed me in front of him. You embarrassed yourself in front of him. He inhaled sharply. You're rewriting the story. No, I said. I'm adding the missing line, that line being. The unit wasn't vacant. 5 years of rent existed. And the waiver was an attempt to erase it. He looked tired now. Not defeated, just calculating. They're lowering the price further, he admitted. Another 6%, that was significant. And, I asked, and I may have to delay other obligations, projects, investments, payments. The structure he built was leaning, and the weight wasn't my fault. You built timing on assumption, I said quietly. I won't say I paid nothing when I did. He held my gaze longer this time. Then, unexpectedly, he said, You always document everything? Yes. You don't trust anyone. I trust paper. He almost smiled at that. Almost. You learned that from me, he said. Maybe I had. But not the way he meant. He turned toward the door. "This isn't over," he said. I didn't think it was. He paused before leaving. "One more thing," he added. "If Caleb walks entirely, you won't like what comes next." I asked evenly. "Pressure," he said. Then he left. The word lingered. Pressure. But pressure requires vulnerability. And for the first time in years, I wasn't vulnerable in the way he expected. Because my lease was signed. My rent was documented. My records were complete. That night, when I tucked Noah into bed, he looked up at me. "Are we leaving soon?" he asked. "Yes," I said softly. "Yes." He thought about that. Then he asked, "Are you still scared?" I paused. "Not the same way," I said. "Why?" "Because I'm not alone anymore." He didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. As I turned off the light, my phone buzzed once more. An email from Caleb's counsel. Subject: final occupancy adjustment, revised closing terms attached. I didn't open it immediately. Because I already knew what it meant. The deal wasn't collapsing. It was shrinking, and every percentage point lost wasn't because I attacked. It was because the numbers had to align with the truth, and truth, unlike pride, doesn't negotiate. The pressure didn't arrive loudly. It arrived quietly, in small, strategic ways. On Wednesday morning, my mother called, not to ask how I was, not to check on Noah. Her voice was tight, controlled. "Your father's lender contacted him again," she said. "They're reviewing his collateral structure." "I know," I replied calmly. A pause. "You didn't have to escalate it," she said. I stared at the stack of labeled moving boxes in the corner of the suit. "I didn't escalate," I answered. I responded. "He says you blindsided him. He blindsided a buyer." Another pause. "You could withdraw your documentation," she said softly. There it was, the request wrapped in concern. "No," I said. Her breath caught slightly. "You're hurting him." "I'm protecting myself." "You're his daughter." "And I paid him rent for 5 years." Silence stretched on the line. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "He thought you'd never challenge him." That landed differently. Not as accusation. As fact. "Why?" I asked. "Because you never did before." I let that settle. "That doesn't mean I agreed," I said. She didn't answer. The call ended without resolution. The pressure escalated by afternoon. A contractor I'd worked with for years called. "Hey," he said carefully. "Your dad mentioned you might be restructuring." "Restructuring?" "I'm not," I replied evenly. "Just checking," he added quickly. He said there might be changes. There it was. Reputation nudge. Not an attack. A seed. I thanked him for calling and hung up. Then I sent 3 emails to long-term clients confirming project continuity. Short, professional and emotional. If my father wanted to apply pressure socially, I would answer operationally. By evening, my sister showed up at the suite door. She looked exhausted. "He's calling people," she said without preamble. I assumed he would. "He's telling them you're making things difficult." "I am," I replied calmly. "For him." She closed her eyes briefly. "He didn't think Caleb would reduce the offer that much." "Did he think misrepresentation wouldn't matter?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked around at the half-packed boxes. "You're really leaving," she said quietly. "Yes. You could stay until after closing." "No." "Why?" she asked, almost pleading. "Because if I stay he'll say he fixed it," I answered. "If I leave on my own timeline he can't." She studied me carefully. "You've changed," she said. "No," I replied. "I stopped absorbing it." She leaned against the doorframe. "He says you're trying to ruin him." "I'm not." "Then what are you doing?" I looked at the boxes. "Breaking the pattern." That silenced her. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Finally she asked, "Are you afraid?" "Yes," I said honestly. "Off what?" "That he'll push harder." "He will." The next morning, the real pressure came. My father showed up at Noah's school. Not inside. Outside the gate. I saw him from the parking lot. Noah froze when he noticed. "Grandpa's here," he whispered. "Yes," I said carefully. We walked toward him together. My father's expression was composed, neutral, public friendly. "Morning," he said smoothly. "Morning," I replied. "I thought I'd pick him up today," he added casually. "No," I said immediately. He smiled faintly. "Why not?" Because that wasn't discussed. You're being dramatic. No, I said, calmly. I'm being consistent. Other parents moved past us, watching without watching. He lowered his voice. You're turning this into something bigger than it is. It's already bigger, I replied. Noah tightened his grip on my hand. My father looked down at him. Buddy, he said warmly, you want to come by the house after school? Noah hesitated, then looked at me. That look. That waiting the inheritance moment. Not today, Noah said softly. It wasn't loud, it wasn't defiant. But it was clear. Something shifted in my father's expression. He wasn't used to that. He wasn't used to a child choosing alignment over obedience. He straightened. Switch yourself, he muttered. Then he walked back toward his car. No scene, no shouting, just the quiet realization that influence was slipping. By midday, another email arrived from Caleb's counsel, revised final terms attached. I opened it, the price had dropped again. Contingent upon vacancy confirmation before closing firm. Documented. My father had less leverage now than when this began. And it wasn't because I attacked, it was because I refused to falsify. My phone buzzed again. This time it was him. I let it ring. Then voicemail. You're making this impossible, he said. If this collapses entirely, you'll answer for it. I didn't respond. Because that threat had lost weight. If the deal collapsed, it would collapse under its own inconsistencies. Not under my documentation. That night, while taping the last moving box shut, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not triumph. Not relief. Clarity. Pressure works when you're unsure. When you're dependent. When you doubt your own footing. But once you have records, contracts, signed leases, pressure becomes noise. Noah sat cross-legged on the floor watching me pack. Are we safe? He asked quietly. Yes, I said. Even if Grandpa's mad? Yes. He considered that. Why? Because we didn't lie, I answered. He nodded. Then he said something small and steady. I like when we don't lie. I smiled, me too. My phone buzzed once more before bed. A final message from Caleb. Closing date confirmed pending vacancy. Appreciate professionalism. Professionalism, not daughter, not help, not complication. Professional. I placed the phone down and turned off the light. The pressure had come. Quiet, strategic, persistent. But it hadn't broken anything. Because I had already stepped out of the part of the story where silence was required. And once you stop signing what isn't true, the pressure loses its power. We moved out on a Tuesday. Not dramatically, not angrily, just efficiently. A rented truck, 3 friends from work, labeled boxes, careful inventory. My father didn't come outside. The curtains in the main house shifted once, then stilled. Noah carried a small box labeled Bocas like it was fragile glass. I carried the folder, the important one. Lease agreement, rent records. Waiver copy, revised offers. Paper that told the truth without raising its voice. By noon, the in-law suite was empty. 5 years reduced to swept floors and faint marks on the wall where Noah's height had been measured. Temporary. That word had stretched long enough. As I locked the door for the last time, my father stepped onto the porch. You're early, he said. The lease starts today, I replied. He studied the moving truck. You didn't have to rush. I'm not rushing, I said. I'm aligning. His mouth tightened slightly. They've confirmed closing contingent on vacancy, he said. I saw. You're satisfied? No, I said honestly. I'm settled. That seemed to irritate him more. He stepped closer. You realize the price dropped another percentage point. Less. You're costing this family. I held his gaze calmly. I paid rent for 5 years, I said. That was contribution. He looked at the empty doorway behind me. You think leaving proves something? No, I replied. It removes confusion. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something quieter. They're reviewing my refinance terms. I didn't respond. He continued almost reluctantly. The lender flagged the projected liquidity. That was the crack. He had built expansion plans on a number that wasn't guaranteed. On a vacancy that wasn't true. You assumed control, I said gently. You didn't confirm it. He stared at me as if I'd betrayed something sacred. I trusted family, he said. You asked family to deny reality. I answered silence. Heavy, but not explosive. Noah walked up beside me then, holding his small backpack. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said. My father looked at him. "Goodbye, buddy." Noah hesitated. Then he said, "Grandpa?" Not running to him. Not reaching. Just steady. That might have been the loudest moment of all. The new rental was smaller, brighter, neutral walls, clean contract, clear terms. No ambiguity. I signed the final move-out confirmation that evening and emailed it to Caleb's counsel. Vacancy effective immediately. Within an hour, a reply came, acknowledged, closing schedule reaffirmed, paper moving again. 3 days later, the town shifted, not loudly, but noticeably. The development sign on the acreage changed, smaller renderings, revised project scope, scaled adjustments. Caleb wasn't walking. But he wasn't paying full expectation either. At church that Sunday, my father didn't attend. My mother sat alone in their usual row. People glanced, measured. No one approached me directly, but 3 neighbors nodded differently. Not warmer, just aware. Reputation doesn't shatter all at once, it thins. My sister called that night. They had to renegotiate collateral terms, she said quietly. I assumed. I know. She paused. He says you forced transparency. I almost smiled. I didn't force anything, I said. I declined to lie. Another pause. He didn't expect you to move before closing. I know. That hurt more than the documentation. That made sense. Because paperwork can be negotiated, but physical absence, that's permanent. Tuesday morning, Caleb called again. Closing is set, he said simply. You handled this professionally, he added. Thank you. He hesitated briefly. For what it's worth, he said. Your father miscalculated leverage. Yes, I replied. He assumed compliance. Yes. There was a faint note of respect in his tone. We prefer partners who document, he said. Partners, not help, not complication. Partners. After the call ended, I sat quietly for a moment. Not triumphant. Just steady. Noah ran into the kitchen with a permission slip. Can you sign this? He asked. I smiled faintly. Of course. I read every line, then signed. He watched. You always read first, he said. Yes. Even if it's boring. Especially then. He nodded like that made perfect sense. That evening, I drove past the old house once, not to linger, just to see. The curtains were closed. The development sign stood firm but modest, scaled, adjusted, not ruined, just reduced, because that's what happens when expectation meets documentation. It shrinks to match reality. And for the first time in years, I felt like my life matched reality too. Closing day didn't feel dramatic. There were no raised voices, no last-minute phone calls, no slammed doors. Just a long polished table in a neutral conference room. Stacks of paper arranged neatly, and 3 attorneys who spoke in calm, measured tones. I wasn't technically required to be there. The property sale was between my father and Caleb, but Caleb had asked me to attend the pre-closing verification meeting. Not as a party, he had said. As a confirmation. Confirmation. It was a small word that carried enormous weight. When I walked into the conference room, my father was already seated. He didn't look at me immediately. His posture was controlled, back straight, expression neutral. But the tension in his jaw told a different story. Caleb nodded once when I entered. Professional acknowledgement. Nothing more. I took a seat at the far end of the table. Not beside my father, not across from him, just present. The attorneys began reviewing documents, parcel boundaries, environmental clearances, updated valuation sheets reflecting occupancy adjustment. Every number was smaller than originally projected, not catastrophic, but precise. The attorney on Caleb's side cleared his throat. For record clarity, he said, we require confirmation that the rear dwelling is vacant and that no tenancy claims remain. The room went quiet. My father shifted slightly in his chair. It's vacant, he said flatly. The attorney turned to me. Ms. Carter. That title, Miss Carter, felt different in that room. It carried independence. Yes, I said calmly. I vacated the property on the 3rd. Lease termination documented. Keys returned. Any outstanding rental consideration? He asked. No. Any claims to future occupancy? No. Every answer was clear, unemotional. Documented. The attorney nodded. Thank you. My father stared at the table, not angry, not explosive, just restrained. The rest of the review continued. Revised closing amount confirmed, collateral structure amended, projected timelines adjusted. Paper moved from one side of the table to the other. Signatures followed, and with each signature something subtle happened. The narrative my father had built for years, the one where he controlled outcomes, grew thinner. Not destroyed. Just reduced to what the documents allowed. When it was over, Caleb capped his pen and stood. "We appreciate everyone's cooperation," he said evenly. Cooperation, that word could mean many things. In this context it meant. The truth slowed this down. The truth reduced the price. The truth altered leverage, but the truth stood. My father gathered his papers slowly. For a moment, he looked like he might speak. Instead, he turned to me. "You're satisfied," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "No," I answered honestly. "I'm resolved." His eyes flickered briefly, or realization. "You cost me," he said. "I corrected the record," I replied. He exhaled sharply. Always technical. Always careful. The room emptied gradually. Caleb paused beside me before leaving. "You handled this the right way," he said quietly. "I handled it the only way that protected me," I answered. He nodded once. "Sometimes that's the same thing." Then he left. I remained seated for a moment after everyone else exited. The closing table was still, the folders stacked neatly, the air quiet. This was the part no one dramatizes. No applause, no triumphant music, just paperwork that reflects reality instead of expectation. My father stepped back into the room briefly. He hadn't meant to. He'd forgotten something on the table. For a second, it was just the two of us again. The same way it had been in his office weeks ago. Except now, there were signatures behind us. "You think this makes you stronger?" he asked. "Then what does it do?" "It ends confusion." He studied me. "You embarrassed me." I refused to disappear. He looked away first. That was new. "You could have trusted me to handle it," he said. "I trusted documentation," I replied. His mouth tightened. "You've changed." I stopped waiting. Silence stretched between us. Not explosive, not fragile, just honest. Finally, he picked up his folder. "This town remembers who built it," he muttered. "Paper remembers who signed it," I answered. He didn't respond. He walked out without looking back. Outside, the sky was overcast but bright. Not stormy, not clear, balanced. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the quiet settle. 5 years in that suite, 5 years of cash envelopes, 5 years of temporary, reduced to a vacancy confirmation and a revised purchase price. But something else had happened too. Something quieter. My son had watched me choose documentation over silence, contract over compliance, clarity over comfort. That inheritance mattered more than land. My phone buzzed. A message from my sister. "It's done." "Yes," I replied. There was a long pause before she responded. "He's not taking it well." I looked back at the building. "He doesn't have to," I typed. Because that was the shift. I no longer needed his understanding to move forward. I got into my car and drove toward our rental. Noah would be home from school soon. He would ask if everything was finished. And I would tell him yes. Not because we won, but because we aligned the story with the truth. When I pulled into our driveway, the house looked small but steady. No grand acreage, no leverage, no hidden clauses, just a clean lease and a predictable payment schedule. Inside, Noah ran toward me. "Is it over?" he asked. I said. "Did you fight?" "No," I answered. "I signed." He nodded thoughtfully. "Did Grandpa?" "Wes." He seemed to consider that. "Yes." "Are you?" I paused. Then I said, "No, because anger requires attachment, and what I felt now wasn't anger, it was distance." "Clean. Documented." That night, as I tucked him in, he looked up at me. "You always read everything," he said. "Yes. Especially then." He smiled faintly. "I'm going to do that too." I kissed his forehead. "Good," I said. Because that was the real closing. Not the sale. Not the revised number. But the moment my son learned that you don't sign away your truth, even when the table is full, and especially when it isn't. The town didn't explode after closing, it shifted, quietly. Like a house settling after the foundation cracks. For weeks, My father had been the man finalizing a major development deal, the host. The connector. The one with inside access after closing, the language changed, revised sale, adjusted scope, delayed rollout. No one said, misrepresentation? No one needed to. In towns like ours, information travels without vocabulary. It moves through pauses, through shortened greetings, through meetings you're no longer invited to. The first real sign came at the Rotary luncheon. I hadn't attended in years, but Leela texted me a photo that afternoon. The podium, the banner, the long tables. My father wasn't there. Instead, another board member stood at the front, smiling too widely. Caption under the photo, leadership transition effective immediately. Transition. That word does a lot of work. I didn't respond to the text. I just stared at the image for a long moment. He had built his identity around presence, around visibility, around being the man people deferred to. And now, he wasn't standing at the podium. He was absent. My mother called that evening. Her voice was thinner than usual. They asked your father to step back for a while, she said. From Rotary. Wes. Temporarily. She hesitated. That told me everything. I'm sorry, I said. And I meant it. Not because he lost status, but because I understood what that loss would do to him. He says you triggered this, she added quickly. I didn't attend the meeting, I replied. Silence. You exposed things that didn't need exposure. I declined to hide things that required accuracy, I said calmly. Her breathing shifted slightly. He feels betrayed. I thought about that. You can't betray someone by refusing to lie, I answered. She didn't argue. She just sighed. 3 days later, another shift. Caleb's firm announced a scaled-back development plan in the local paper. Smaller footprint. Phased construction, community listening sessions. It wasn't framed as damage control. It was framed as responsible recalibration. But everyone knew. The price adjustment had ripple effects. Investments reorganized, commitments reduced, timelines stretched. My father's original leverage pitch, vacant land immediate access, had dissolved. And in its place was something quieter. Verified occupancy, adjusted valuation, structured compliance. Truth doesn't scream, it subtracts. The grocery store was the first place I felt the social shift directly. Mrs. Dougherty, who used to smile politely and move on, stopped me in the produce aisle. I read about the development changes, she said carefully. Yes, I replied. She tilted her head slightly. Must have been complicated. It was documented, I said, her lips pressed together. Then she surprised me. Good for you, she said quietly. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. Good for you, that was new. At home, Noah had started asking fewer questions about his grandfather, not because he forgot, but because children adjust faster than adults. One night, while finishing homework at the kitchen table, he looked up at me. Is Grandpa still mad? Yes, I said. Will he always be? I don't know. He thought about that. Did he lose? The question caught me off guard. No, I said carefully. He adjusted. What does that mean? It means he expected one outcome and got another. Noah nodded slowly. Because you told the truth. Yes. He returned to his homework, satisfied. Children don't complicate what adults dramatize. The next shift came in a place I hadn't anticipated. Church. I hadn't attended regularly in years. But my sister invited me to sit with her one Sunday. I hesitated, then agreed. When we walked into the sanctuary, conversations dipped slightly. Not gossiping, just recalibrating. My father wasn't there. My mother sat 3 rows ahead. She didn't turn around. After service, Pastor Green approached me. He was careful, measured. I understand there were complications with the sale, he said. Yes, I replied. I'm glad it resolved. So am I. He studied me for a moment. You handled it with restraint, he added. That word landed differently than praise. Restraint. Because that's what it had been. I hadn't attacked. I hadn't publicly accused. I had documented, and documentation had done the rest. The final shift came unexpectedly. An invitation, a local business roundtable. Caleb had recommended Harborline participate. My name was on the list. Not as someone's daughter, not as someone's help, but as a peer. When I told Noah about the meeting, he grinned. That's cool, he said. It's still cool. I smiled. He paused. Do you think Grandpa would go to that? I don't know. I answered honestly. He considered that. Then he said something simple. You don't need him there? And that was it. The quiet truth. I didn't need him there. Not at the closing table, not at Rotary, not at a podium. The applause he used to receive had faded. Not because I tore it down, but because it relied on a version of reality that couldn't withstand review. And applause, when it isn't backed by integrity, doesn't last long. That night, as I turned off the kitchen lights, I realized something important. This wasn't revenge. There had been no dramatic exposure, no shouting, no public humiliation, just documentation. And sometimes, the most powerful collapse happens not when someone attacks your reputation, but when the numbers stop agreeing with your story. And when that happens, the applause stops on its own. It was almost 3 weeks after the closing when he came to the townhouse. No announcement, no warning. Just a knock at 7:12 p.m. Right after Noah and I had finished dinner. I knew it was him before I opened the door. Some tensions don't fade. They settle. He stood on the porch without his usual posture. No blazer, no polished shoes, just a dark jacket and tired eyes. Can I come in? He asked. Not demanded. Asked. That was new. I stepped aside. He walked into the living room slowly, taking in the small space. The narrow hallway. The simple furniture. The stack of Noah's schoolbooks on the coffee table. It's smaller than I expected, he said. It's accurate, I replied. He didn't respond to that. No, peeked around the corner. Hi, Grandpa. My father's face softened slightly. Hi, buddy. There was hesitation between them now. Not fear, not anger. Distance. Go finish your homework, I told Noah gently. He nodded and disappeared into his room. We stood in the quiet living room. No big dining table, no polished wood, no audience. Just two people without performance. I spoke to my lender again, he said finally. I waited. They adjusted the refinance structure. I assumed. He nodded faintly. I miscalculated. There it was. Not a full apology, not dramatic, but closer to honesty than he'd ever allowed. You built on projection, I said. I built on expectation, he corrected. That's the same thing when it's undocumented, I replied. He let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. You always did speak like a contract. I had to, I said quietly. Silence settled again. You left before closing? He said. Yes, that cost me leverage. I know. Another pause. I thought you'd stay, he admitted. Why? Because you always stayed. That landed deeper than any accusation. Because he was right. For years, stayed quiet, stayed compliant, stayed temporary. I stopped waiting, I said softly. For what? For you to see me without diminishing me. He looked at the floor, not in shame. In thought. I didn't think you'd push back, he said. I replied. I documented. He nodded slowly. I embarrassed you, he said after a moment. Yes. I thought it was harmless. It wasn't. Silence. Then something smaller. I didn't think about Noah hearing it. That was the first time he had said my son's name in this entire conflict. That's why I moved, I said. He looked toward the hallway where Noah's room was. He wouldn't come with me at school, he said quietly. No. He looked at you first. Yes. My father swallowed once. I used to be the one he ran to. Yes. And now? Now he watches. That hurt him. I could see it. Not because he lost money. Not because Rotary shifted. Not because the deal shrank. Because a child hesitated. I didn't mean to make him choose, he said. But you did. He nodded slowly. The room felt different now, not tense. Just stripped of performance. I read the revised article, he said unexpectedly. What article? The follow-up about Harborline expanding. I blinked. Oh. He added. Yes, you didn't mention me. No. Another silence. Why not? Because this wasn't about you. That seemed to unsettle him more than blame would have. For years, he had centered himself in every narrative. And now, he wasn't the main character. You could have ruined me, he said quietly. I didn't want to. You still could. I won't. He studied my face carefully. Why? Because consequences don't require cruelty. That sentence lingered between us. He sat down slowly in the chair by the window. For the first time in my life, he looked smaller, not physically, just human. I thought control kept things stable, he admitted. It kept them silent, I said. He didn't argue. Noah's door opened slightly. He stepped into the hallway. Can I say something? He asked. Yes, I said gently. He walked into the room and stood between us. I don't like when people laugh at Mom, he said quietly. The air shifted. My father looked at him directly. I won't do that again, he said. No jokes, no sarcasm, no deflection. Just a statement. Noah studied him carefully. Okay, he said. Then he walked back to his room. The silence that followed was different, not heavy, not brittle. Just real. I can't undo what happened, my father said. No, but I can stop repeating it. Yes, he nodded once. Not triumphant, not defeated, just aware. I underestimated you, he said. I note again. That wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement, and sometimes. That's the first honest step. He stood to leave. At the door he paused. You were right not to sign, he said. It was the closest thing to concession he had ever given me. I know, I replied. He almost smiled. Then he stepped outside. I closed the door gently. No slam, no final scene, just quiet. When I walked back into the kitchen, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not victory, not relief, balance. He hadn't been destroyed. He hadn't been humiliated publicly. He hadn't lost everything. He had lost leverage. And he had learned that control without accuracy collapses. And that was enough. Later that night, Noah came into the living room and curled beside me. Nah, he asked. No, I said softly. Are you? No. He thought about that. Did you win? I smiled gently. No. What happened then? We told the truth, I said. And the truth adjusted everything. He nodded slowly. That's better than winning. Yes, it was, because revenge would have been loud. This was precise, and precise changes last longer than applause ever does.